Okay, let's take a look at the docket. What video should I do next? Let's see here. Luigi's Mansion fans, hypocrites. I don't have any footage for that, so I guess I'll skip it. Like all the other times. Why, Hey Pikmin is the best in the series. I don't think anybody's ready for that one. Least of all me. Why Super Smash Bros. Needs more Fire Emblem characters. Wasn't that one a joke? Yeah, it was. I should take out the list one day. Maybe later. So I guess that just leaves a No. 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 I'm done with you. I finished you. I played your game, figuratively and literally. No, I don't want to, but it's my only option. No. 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 No! Alright, let's see here. How's it going, everybody? I'm Bearhead2, and welcome to another B2 review. I'm going to change that name one day, but today's not the day. Anyway, I'm going to be reviewing Today, I'm going to be reviewing this game. If you don't know how my reviews work, they're pretty simple. I choose 10 categories that I believe best represent the game, and score those categories on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, and 5 being rather average. So with that quick detour out of the way, it's time for you to grab your assorted merchandise, your assorted fast food items, and your assorted large kitchen utensils. It's time to jump right on in. I just want to get this over with. So the first category of the day is gameplay, and boy howdy, does it ever. Your basic moveset is running, jumping, sprinting, crouching, and sprinting while crouching. It's pretty basic, really. Doesn't seem to be really any different from most other horror games in existence. But of course, there's more to it than that. Like, for example, a flashlight, which can be toggled on and off with your average left click. It can be found pretty early in the game. Doesn't seem to be really any different from most other horror games in existence. Okay, there's more to it than that. There's also a camera that also with your average left click produces a flashbang. Said flashbang will stun any adversaries within a certain radius, provided they're not wearing any kind of facial protection. And there's also a ray gun. It allows you to fulfill your first-person shooter dreams and use your 6 available shots to produce localized flashbangs, which I guess is what a laser is in the first place. So your basic moveset is not that exciting, but I am neglecting one thing. You can use E to interact with certain things, which most of the time is just hiding in things or using noisemakers. But who could forget him? I'm a bit torn on him, honestly. I can't tell if he's genius or really bad game design. But what's his gameplay like? Using him gives you complete invincibility, with one exception, and, depending on how far into the game you are, the ability to dispel other enemies, open certain gates, and see far-off collectibles. You can definitely say that his abilities can be summed up to your convenience. But don't use him too much, or he'll kill you. Which I've never understood. You see, he's my buddy, my pal, my friend, my chum, and he's somehow managed to avoid any shenanigans going on behind the scenes. He's avoided going feral. He's made it his personal mission in life to protect me from all harm. So why does he kill me when he runs out of power? Is the power level his ability to hold off his primal instincts? I mean, with his efficiency, this guy wouldn't be able to perform for 10 minutes before giving in and trying to kill somebody. Nope, it's just a power level. I guess I shouldn't let gameplay get in the way of a good story. So those are all the abilities you have access to, but what do you actually do with them? Well, the game usually has you sneaking past your enemies and trying to find something. In a vacuum, it certainly does seem like it could be kind of interesting, although I doubt the maximum interest level is all that high. But that does mean it is a perfect candidate for a level designs what takes gameplay out of a vacuum. It takes the gameplay and puts it in an interesting scenario. So does the game do that? Let's be real here, the majority of the time you're running around and sneaking around and trying to find things. But of course, it's not inherently a bad thing. The issue is it's the only thing you do 98% of the time. The level design, by and large, stays exactly the same. You have somewhere you need to be, and there's an enemy roaming around that you need to avoid along with several staff bots to get in the way. The setup stays largely the same, except occasionally there are 2 enemies you need to avoid instead. But I wouldn't call that a huge difference. Really, what do I say? You just run around various sized hallways and rooms, and there's somewhere you need to be, and there's something you need to avoid. Perhaps if the base gameplay was more interesting, the level design wouldn't need to compensate as much, but I am neglecting the occasional change of pace. There are occasional things you can do that change up the moment-to-moment gameplay, like the occasional arcade machine, with lore included, but those are completely optional. But the thing I'm mostly focusing on here are the office sections. It takes the first game's gameplay and puts it in 3D! It doesn't even last 3 minutes. Oh, and I'm pretty sure there's only 2 of them. On the other hand, the game and its level design are rather sandbox in nature, and there are plenty of nooks and crannies that the game hides stuff in. Speaking of which, the spread of the collectible items and message bags, at least to me, didn't seem to leave too much to be desired. I had no opinions on it while playing the game, so I'll just assume that's a good thing. To sum it up, the level design doesn't vary the gameplay, and when it does, it's entirely inconsequential. The arcade games are quick, although not nearly as quick as the office sections, and fun distractions, although I'm not counting them here. The item spread is a nice mix between in your face and in corner you didn't even know existed. The level design isn't bad, it really isn't, but I wouldn't call it actively good. It doesn't really detract, but does leave room to be desired. So that probably means it should get a... So, if you happen to be pulling a Patrick Star, that is living under a rock, you should know that this game has graphical options. So to be completely fair, only judge the game on its highest graphical settings. So let me tell you, the graphics sure do graphic. The lighting illuminates, the textures provide texture, the reflections reflect, and the 3D models are definitely made of polygons. What I'm saying here is that the game has graphics, and a whole lot of them. Okay, what I'm really saying here is that the game looks pretty good. Most of the models are pretty high quality, most of the textures are pretty high quality, the lighting works pretty well, I think. I'm not an expert on video game lighting, and the reflections are pretty good too. But not all of it's perfect. Sometimes you can plainly see polygons, which to be fair is to be expected. More textures than you might usually think have pretty obvious pixels, and sometimes it makes you think I'm looking at a stalk of wheat, because it's pretty grainy. Sometimes the lighting freaks out too. But honestly, when everything is looking its best, it looks pretty darn good. Sure, it's no Luigi's Mansion 3, but again, it looks pretty good. So in the graphics category, I think the game is definitely deserving of a... Unless you're a puzzle game, you'll need something to test your player skills. You'll utilize, more often than not, a boss fight. This game barely has any boss fights, if you can even call them that. Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you here, I'm not that good at coming with categories, so I just took what I could get, which was this category. So I guess we're gonna be stuck with it. There were 2 things I could think of that seem to be the most boss fight-like. There was this one which acts like a boss fight, but doesn't really sound like one, and there's this one which sounds like a boss fight, but doesn't really act like one. There's also this one here which kind of seems like it's supposed to be a final boss of some sort. But would this be a boss? It kinda seems like one. Is this a boss fight? If the other ones are, then this one probably is. Then what about this thing? The most boss fight of the bunch seem to be the first thing that I mentioned. But it's hard to tell what's a special area and what's a boss fight. These boss fights are rather average. They're not too special, you could say. In fact, they're kind of... lame. They're basically just more of your average gameplay, which I suppose isn't really a bad thing, which isn't a good thing, but it's not really a bad thing. I guess it's another case of, if it ain't really broke, don't bother fixing it. So I called it rather average. Do you remember what that score would be? It would be a... The game is what could be charitably described as a soundtrack. There really doesn't seem to be all that much there, although, to be fair, it is a horror game and horror games don't exactly need big soundtracks. Quantity doesn't equal quality, but speaking of which, what is the quantity? The game has a few tracks that play when you're in certain areas. There's not a whole lot of them, but there are some. There's the ambience, that features distorted instruments that you could describe as music, and the cutscenes are usually scored to some degree. But in my opinion, because music is a terribly subjective thing, none of the music is really that memorable, although the game does have a main theme it uses for some of its music. But if you randomly ask me one day to remember music tracks from this game, it might take me a while. I can definitely tell that somebody somewhere probably really likes this soundtrack. It just doesn't happen to be me. None of the music is bad or ear-grating, unless, of course, you're the ambience that plays during the blackout section of the daycare, which, and I'm gonna be frank with you here, is not the best thing I've ever heard. The music is a decent listen while the game is happening. I just probably wouldn't go back and listen to the soundtrack again. The music is pretty alright, it's just that I happen to find it to be, on average, not that memorable. But I still am going to give music a... Once again, I'm not very good at coming up with categories, so we're going to be stuck with this one too. But there are a few things I can mention. But first, a quick description. This category is all about scoring a game on any and all reasons instead of a brand new game. Does the game incentivize you to do it, or does it do the opposite? To put it very simply, no it doesn't. Darn it, now I've done it. I've gone and summoned the infamous question of why. Well, I believe the issue is the game's very core. You simply can't go in depth to any degree about anything in this franchise without mentioning lore. And need I remind you, the lore is likely none less than half the reason the game exists in the first place. Why do we replay games? Sometimes games have extra achievements or acknowledgements if you beat the game multiple times, but the most common reason is you want to experience it again. The lore is likely the main reason you played the game. It's the main attraction, and once you experience it for the first time, that's it. You don't need to play the game again to experience it again. You are likely going to remember what you saw and what you heard, and on the off chance that you forget, well, the internet has your back. You can much more easily find a couple dozen YouTube videos that showcase and talk about it than you can spending a couple hours playing the game again to find the lore again. Unless you think the game is a pretty fun gameplay loop, which I've already talked about, but if you do, good for you, the biggest reason to play the game once is now gone, and if anything, it becomes a reason to not play the game a second time. Counterpoint though, I did say the collectibles are a reason to replay a game, and this game has collectibles. True, but I see no reason as to why you'd want to find all those things again. But maybe that's just me, so I'm gonna cap off replayability with a score of... While playing the game, I never noticed the game's difficulty, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a whole bunch of people that think about a game's difficulty and difficulty progression while playing it. But looking back, I never had a good reason to notice it. Given my gaming skills, I never felt the game was too hard or too easy. Maybe you could look at the amount of times I was caught by staff bots, evidence that I was bad at the game, but do they really count? They're more just small and very numerous obstacles, but they don't really do much more than annoy and frustrate you, so I'm not counting them. As for the game's difficulty progression, it doesn't exist. As things went on, the game never felt like it was getting harder. I was just being presented with things I had to figure out how to do and died several times during the process. The closest it gets to progression of any kind are the upgrade sections. They do get a tad more complex as time goes on, but that's the closest the game gets to difficulty progression of any kind. I have no clever ways to end off this category, so let's just skip to the score. Wait, no, I can't use this. This game doesn't have any multiplayer. How can I score a game on a single player if there's no multiplayer to compare it against? And if there's a multiplayer, well... Listen, guys. I can't use you right now. Why don't you go and... wait somewhere else? Listen, I'm really sorry. I really am. Maybe next time. Well, I guess that means I'm gonna need some category understudies now. Let's look. No. There's nothing good here. Maybe except for these last two. I guess I'll just have to roll with it. For a first in the series, you can actually keep playing. Once you reach an exit and choose to stay, an extra party pass is materialized, and you can go do the other thing that required one. Because you got one before, and you got to choose where to use it. You already know this, but I forgot to explain it anyway. As I mentioned, you're allowed to go do things you weren't able to do the first time around. It's definitely nice you don't have to start a new save file to do this. Of course, you could not play past any ending and start a new game to do stuff you didn't do before, but...
Why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Yeah, it doesn't give you anything new, but does unlock the rest of the game and lets you everything it has to offer. At least it isn't wimpy and has a substantial amount of stuff to do. So, I feel pretty good about giving this a score of... Horror, or what's scary, is, much like music, a very subjective thing, but I want to at least try, whenever possible, to look at something via an objective lens. So that begs the question, how do I judge what's scary purely by myself? By using my meager amount of knowledge on human psychology. Aw yeah, I'm about to say a whole lot of things that are gonna be wrong. I know that a lot of different people find a lot of different things scary, and often it's not just one thing, but I believe it's a collection of smaller individual aspects. There's going to be no way I'm going to be able to tell you about what all of these are, nor should I talk about all of them in the first place. So let's see if I can do this as simply as I possibly can, but more importantly, as correctly as I possibly can. I mean, I'm not going to do a very good job, but I'm at least going to try, and that's something. So what makes something horror? Well, in my opinion, it should be scary, unnerving, and induce a sense of self-preservation. So how does a horror game do that? Well, I'm going to break this down to two subjects, ambience and enemies. Let's start with ambience, as I probably have the least to say about that. Ambience is absolutely made up of a lot of small things. If you're in a dark room, that's not scary, or if you're in a plain white room with a skull hung on the wall, that's also not scary. You need more than that. Ambience isn't just what you see though, it's also what you hear, and I have no real opinions on the ambient sounds or music, which I suppose could be a good thing, but maybe not. They're not really all that amazing, or that effective to me. But from a visual perspective, the game seems to be more interested in making the worlds you lived in than creepy. There's nothing wrong with that, world building isn't bad, but it's not scary. That's what I'm trying to talk about here. For example, look at this. This isn't scary. Being creepy isn't entirely forgotten about, it just doesn't seem to be the main focus most of the time. Enemies is a lot more specific, and I definitely have more to say. You probably already know what I mean, but I'm going to specify anyway. Enemies cover the things your self-preservation instinct is likely going to tell you to avoid. You know, the big scary. There are a total of 9 different enemies in the game that you need to avoid, and the reasons for being scary are completely different from that of the ambience, but are just as complicated, if not more. There's also these guys, but do they even matter? But where to begin? For most of the cast, they make heavy use of the uncanny valley effect. You know, the thing where people feel uneasy or creeped out by something that closely resembles but isn't perfectly human? It's absolutely an effect here, but it can be cancelled out by other things, usually by making things more cartoony, or rather, less human. Most of these characters, I feel, are a tad too cartoony for their own good. While the effect is there for the reason I mentioned, it's somewhat negated. That and they seem to be a bit too child-friendly. The series is absolutely uses before in its characters, but it, in addition to other things, turns it on its head and provides the inverse intended effect. Oddly enough though, it's the two legacy characters, this guy doesn't count, that I find the scariest. Which is strange considering that one of them is supposed to be helping you, but that's beside the point. Just chalk him up as one more confused person this franchise has left in its wake. Another aspect of the creep factor with these characters is their, well, personality. Would you consider a zombie all that scary if all they did was pat you on the back and say, "Good job, sport"? Probably not. Every squad got the friendly fire, nutcase, rage issues, racist, crazy one. Oh yeah, that guy! The one who's wanted in several unspecified African countries for various war crimes. That is, the sinister one. The spooky, scary skeleton. And Carl! Oh wait, he's dead. Oh, wow, that's sad. Well, moving on, you see what I mean. I personally don't find the archetypes to be all that terrifying, at least in the way the game uses them. But again, that could just be me. But there's one more aspect I want to touch on. Something that has the ability to up a lackluster character design a few points. One thing that you probably already know about this franchise's animatronics is that they're often implied to not be working correctly, and this is kind of a big deal. But why? It's because it adds an element of unpredictableness. That's the key word. But again, why? I believe the fear of the unknown is a universal fear. Why do we fear death? Because we don't know what we'll see. Why do we fear the dark? Because it's hard to tell what's going on. I heard once that we're not afraid of being alone in the dark, we're afraid of not being alone in the dark. And I think that holds pretty true. If something is hunting you down, it's probably going to kill you, but you have no idea how it works, then everything you do and everything you don't do becomes a risk. Once you figure out its limitations and its patterns, you become more comfortable and less afraid. Knowledge is power, and the best horror games try and cause a blackout. Slight tangent here. Speaking of patterns, the patterns your enemies have are woefully simple. 99% of the time, all you need to do is stay out of the field of view, don't make too much noise, and don't get caught by a staff bot. And when they're not chasing you, they just walk around in a set pattern, or simply haven't spawned in the level yet. No, really. And that's literally how all of your enemies work, except for the moon. He just stays in a place you're probably going to walk through, and that's it. That's all he does. Going back to what I was saying, you're average for the adversary, so it implies you're not already be working at peak performance. Pun not really intended. But things are about to change once you realize you can do this, and a whole lot of this. Not only does this better the designs by giving more of that mechanical sense and removing some of the cartooniness, you can now tell just by looking, and that's the important part, that the peak performance has dropped even more. They certainly look a lot more unpredictable, which is surely worth something, but in reality, they aren't. The patterns are just modified, and not in any real major way. It's just basically just more of the same thing. But maybe there's some points for the designs. Even though I've been going on forever, I've still yet to mention her, so let's make a checklist here. Moves in a set pattern. Check. Stay out of their field of view. Check. Don't make too much noise. Honestly, I don't really know. Let's check it just to be safe. There's nothing else interesting. Check. That's a pretty definitive answer. She is none different than your average animatronic. In fact, she may even be one, because she doesn't bleed. I guess while this is the topic at hand, how does she stack up on scary? To make a long story short, not really. Unless you really hate crazy people. Finally, to cap this all off, are the jump scares. Some people say that jump scares are cheap because they're simple one-and-done deals. That's true, but it's not the whole story. The reason jump scares work so well in horror games isn't to provide a quick scare, but to provide stress, at least when used correctly. The threat of a jump scare can make you nervous, knowing that at any moment something can pop up in front of you. But if you see it coming, is it really a jump scare? There's certainly no jump and thusly no scare. Anticipated jump scares are all too common in this game. I know it's just a byproduct of the fact the game is fully 3D, but still, if I hide something and it gets spotted anyway, I know I'm going to be jump scared. Take this for an example. Ignore my reaction. Nice little gander at the mini golf course here. They have no threat of dying. Just to, relaxing. Ooh! I heard, and I made it pretty obvious, the preparing an attack sound effect. That meant I was at risk of dying. It doesn't guarantee it, but allowed me to anticipate it. Are anticipated jump scares even jump scares? I think that's all I have to say on this subject. So to sum it up, the ambience is more concerned with world building, half the jump scares don't work, and the character design doesn't work extremely well. Trust me, there's more I could have said about that. So what does that leave the final score for this category? Well, it's pretty complicated, but I guess I'll have to boil it down to a... They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so how many words is a video worth? I don't know, but probably a lot, as it means I won't have to do any talking. Instead, all I have to say is, roll the music! I want to touch on a few things while I'm here. Like, probably already saw these, I just want to mention them. Like the multiple times I saw somebody slide across the floor only to disappear into a wall, or the time I managed to clip through this wall, and this wall too. Multiple times. Sometimes I got stuck, and some things just don't have collision. But that's child's play, a mere morsel of the extent of this game. None of that holds a candle to the 2 separate times I got soft-locked. The first time I had to delete my save file and spent 2 hours replaying the game to get back to where I was, even while ignoring most of the collectibles. The second time, I thankfully had a second save file in hand with no lost progress. But that does remind me of something. I saw a warning once that said you should keep multiple save files in hand in case anything happened. I didn't think I'd need it. I didn't heed that warning. But I did need it. I thought the first time was just a fluke, but the second time I was lucky enough to have another save file. I'm sure some of the bugs I experienced have been patched out, but that doesn't excuse the fact that they were there in the first place. In fact, some of the retro CDs can only be obtained via glitches when the game first came out, although it seems like it's quickly patched. That's still pretty poor. And even though you already know this, I should mention the endings. 5 of the 6 of them are in a comic book style. Which would be fine if the game had a comic book aesthetic outside of these endings. There were even 4 fully 3D cutscenes, so it's not like it couldn't be done, it's just pretty obvious these are just time-saving measures. Although, weirder still, even though most of the endings have dialogue, only 3 of the 5 endings have voice acting. Out of all the dialogue bubbles in all the endings, only 1 is actually spoken. The other instances of voice acting are just breathing. At that point, why even have voice acting for these things? Watch this cutscene, and as you do, let me tell you that anywhere between 50 to 90 seconds later, you're seeing this. The disparity between these 2 cutscenes is pretty evident. Given the amount of glitches, the content unavailable without them, and the out-of-left-field comic book endings, and the 2 times I got soft-locked, it's safe to say this game is another example of that Miyamoto quote. Something, rush games are bad, or something like that. Maybe this score is harsh, but it certainly isn't without reason. Polish... Polish is gonna get a... So that's all 10 categories. Man, I've droned on, haven't I? And speaking of droning on, while I'm talking here, all the scores are going to be on screen. So that leaves one final question. What's the grand total? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, please put your hands together for the out of 100 score of 52. Wow, that's kind of low, but it is still slightly above average. But I should save the discussion for the final thoughts section, which starts right now. I'm sure this game was made for the fans, of which I am not. That may have lended itself to the rather low scores I gave the game. I try to look at this at least somewhat objectively, though. And even though my opinions on the franchise as a whole can very easily change and range from, if I could put the game in my hand, I squeeze as hard as I physically could, then I'd open my hand, look at the gooey stain, and then realize it isn't doing enough, and start slapping my hand on every hard surface that I can think of, the floor, the wall, the window, the ceiling, my face, your face, then take another look at my hand, realize it still isn't doing enough, and run out to the road, and start slapping the road as hard as I can for as long as I can, and then once I can no longer take the pain, I'll inspect my bruised, bloody, bone shard-ridden hand and look at the stain on my hand and realize it's stained on my life as well, to, I think I did a pretty good job at avoiding these flimsy opinions. But that seems to be all I have to say on the subject, at least for right now. So, thanks for watching, I suppose, and, goodbye. Yep. Bye-bye. So long. Bon voyage. That was awful. Just plain awful. At least I'm done with this, but I'll never be finished. He won't let me. Hey, come on, dude. Can you let me go? I'm kind of tired of doing your bidding, you know. Don't you think you can let me go? Let me live my life?
No, I don't really feel like it right now.
Oh, come on!